Welcome to the third video of our What's Next for Planet Zoo series. Last episode we covered the continent of Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia in our combined Eurasia video. Today's chosen continent are the combined Americas. Do keep in mind we covered South America extensively already in our inaugural video, so please check that video out first, but we will be expanding on those ideas even further with some pack ideas from North, Central and South America. So let's get straight into it. Our first pack idea, perhaps one of highest priority, covers the Canadian wilderness. This is a broad term to describe the traditional frontier lands away from the major population centres. This includes the Yukon, Northwest, Nunavut and Labrador territories. As such, it includes a variety of polar, tundra and boreal forest animals, especially some critically popular animals left out from the starting roster or those that have been overlooked from the recent Arctic Pack DLC. The first animal is one of my favourite deer species and a huge personal expectation upon release, is the moose. Although it is not necessarily a common zoo specimen, its large size and rarity makes it a considerably lucrative candidate. I have chosen the eastern moose as it is reasonably sized, not the largest subspecies, but it is also the most threatened of the North American populations. The next candidate was an unfortunate exclusion from the Arctic Pack, as it is undeniably an iconic Arctic animal, the Arctic fox. These small canids are most famous for their seasonal fur coats, switching from a luscious white in winter to a shorter brown-grey summer morph. And it would be great if this mechanic was somehow implemented into the game if this animal was ever considered. The range of the American black bear is most consistent in Canada, where they occupy most of the heavily forested regions all the way to the tundra line in the Arctic. As the world's most common bear species, they have no conservational concern, but that is perhaps why they are famous and commonly occur in captivity. This bear is also fairly different enough from the Asiatic black bear, already represented in the game by the Formosan variety, to not be considered a clone. The wolverine is our fourth candidate, one of the most requested mustelids, with its population most dense in North America. Considered an Arctic, tundra, boreal and even temperate forest animal, it is highly adaptable and lends itself as a decent captive specimen with over 100 in zoos worldwide. A capable though distant alternative is the Canada lynx. It inhabits the entire Canadian boreal and tundra region, though with other lynxes or cat varieties in the mix and its competition for a smaller carnivore slot, it makes it a less possible candidate. Our final slot goes to the musk ox. Musk ox had a decent shout inside the Arctic Pack too, as their range is mostly within the Arctic Circle. Excessive hunting has restricted their modern range to the Canadian and Greenland tundra, making them essentially a native North American animal, but recent reintroductions have occurred in areas such as Alaska, Scandinavia, Siberia and the Svalbard Islands. However, they tend to not fare that well in captivity. The Canadian province of British Columbia provides an interesting idea for a pack that is more temperate in its scope compared to our previous pack. The region's unique combination of mountain ranges, sprawling dense forests and waterways provide an exceptionally pristine environment rich with diverse, interesting candidates. The first candidate is a subspecies of the previously discussed American black bear. The commodity bear is the official provincial mammal of British Columbia, famous for many individuals pertaining the cream white fur due to a recessive gene. Due to the isolation of this bear from the rest of the black bear populations in North America, this genetic distinction has become a common trait for this particular subspecies, giving it its other common name, the spirit bear. So far, there is only one of these rare bears in captivity. The British Columbia wolf is a subspecies of the grey wolf, but by far one of its most distinguished, noted for its melanistic, almost black fur coat. Like the commodity bear, this wolf's isolation in the British Columbia province has allowed this genetic trait to become commonplace among the population. This next slot covers the caprid variety that is seen in the mountains of British Columbia. The mountain goat is fairly common in zoos and has appeared in numerous other zoo games as a core animal. It inhabits the major ranges that pass through British Columbia province, such as the Rocky Mountains and Cascade Range, and would be considered a very likely candidate. Alternatively, the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep lives alongside the mountain goat, but the recent introduction of the Dall sheep in the Arctic Pack has caused some overlap. The Roosevelt elk is the largest subspecies of elk in North America, residing in the temperate forest of the Pacific Northwest. This deer is particularly famous because it was one of the animals earmarked by President Theodore Roosevelt in his campaigns of conservation, establishing national parks within its range and reversing decades of overhunting that was threatening the animal. Finally, the Canada lynx can also be considered here as it boasts a sizable population in British Columbia. Its dense silvery brown coat defines itself from the more tawny colours of the Eurasian and Iberian lynxes, making it highly adaptable to the colder regions of the continent to avoid competition with another closely related lynx, the bobcat. Canada lynx really only appear in North American zoos, and their lack of conservation issues makes them ultimately less appealing. Our next pack covers the Wetlands biome, which is dominant over North America. From the iconic Everglades to the Great Lakes region, wetlands have fruitful variation in biodiversity, and as such can introduce a more broad range of non-mammalian animals. The American alligator is by far the most infamous crocodilian in the Americas and should be the designated flagship. Its broad U-shaped snout and dark black coloration stands out from among the other crocodilians in the game, and many feel that the addition of this animal is an eventuality. Another hugely iconic wetland animal of North America is the beaver. The beaver is a very interesting candidate because it allows the possibility of new mechanics and behaviours, such as dam construction, as well as being a semi-aquatic rodent with its niche not yet covered in Planet Zoo's roster. The next candidate is the alligator snapping turtle, probably the most famous but dangerous turtle in North America, inhabiting many freshwater regions in southeastern United States. Its large size and perceived dangerousness has seen its introduction as a staple in American zoos and reptile houses, and proves to be a popular request. Since some individuals are exceptionally large, and even the average size of this turtle is already quite large, it may even warrant a position as a habitat animal rather than an exhibit specimen. The fourth candidate is the Florida panther, of which we first mentioned in our Rare Cats DLC idea in the first video of the series. This critically endangered large cat resides in the Everglades, where it relies on the swampy marshlands of this region for its survival. As a result, it can be classified as an almost exclusive wetlands animal and would be a lucrative addition to the roster. Our final slot has to consider the amazing variety of North American wetland birds. These birds mimic the flamingo in niche and behaviour, and thus are suitable for a straight addition into the game without much mechanical issues. The first is the whooping crane, the tallest North American bird, but one with pressing conservational issues. It was brought from the brink of extinction through intense captive breeding, with current estimates of its population still at a fragile 800 individuals. This semi-migratory bird inhabits many major wetlands across the continent, including the Everglades, Great Lakes, and Wood Buffalo National Park in Alberta, Canada, the second largest national park in the world, and one dedicated especially to the protection of the whooping crane. The alternative is the roseate spoonbill, an illustriously coloured bird with a distinguishing spoon-shaped bill. It is much more common in South America, though also nests in the Everglades, Mississippi River Delta, and the coastal wetlands of Texas. The prairies of North America is another iconic biome in this continent, constituting the temperate grasslands, savannas, and scrublands of the Midwestern United States and the Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba provinces of Canada. The Great Plains is the famous region associated with this pack, and although iconic animals of the plains such as the bison and pronghorn have already been added, there is more unique biodiversity here that could be explored. The first is the coyote, an extremely adaptable canine that appears over much of continental North America, but is mostly associated with the prairies, where it is an effective predator of prairie dogs, jackrabbits, chipmunks, and other rodents. Ever since the extermination of substantial grey wolf populations in the United States, coyotes have begun to encroach on new habitats such as broken forest, alpine regions, and deserts. Coyotes can be found readily in select zoos as they are considered tameable, though also have a reputation for aggression. To pair with the coyote as a natural prey item, and as one of the most abundant animals on the prairie, the black-tailed prairie dog is considered here. With the vast amount of rodents that occupy this biome, it is a difficult prospect to find a suitable candidate, so maybe judging by population size is fine. The white-tailed deer is our servant for this pack, a very widespread and abundant animal over both American continents. As generalists, they can adapt to a wide variety of habitats, and thus could be considered for a host of other packs, but as the resident deer species on the prairies, it's a suitable candidate. They are among the most represented of all deer species in captivity, appearing in zoos, farms, and game reserves. Our next slot is an endangered mustelid that is slightly obscure, the black-footed ferret. Declining prey populations, trapping for the fur trade, and a disease plague destroyed their numbers until they were declared extinct in the wild in the late 1970s. Conservation efforts have established very small and restricted populations in Wyoming, South Dakota, and Arizona. Today they are among the most threatened of land mammals in the US. Finally, we cover the second predator slot for the prairies, starting with the bobcat. Bobcats are the smallest of the lynxes. They have less developed facial hair and are colored with a variable spotty reddish brown that cites their less common name, the red lynx. Bobcats inhabit more temperate and subtropical regions of North America to avoid competition with the Canada lynx, and these include the vast prairies in the center of the continent. A more localized predator of the prairies is the swift fox, a small and agile fox species that lives exclusively in shortgrass prairies east of the Rockies. Swift fox are another historically endangered species, but today their population are mostly stable. With some representation in zoos, they are an adequate alternative to the bobcat. The deserts of North America are another extensive biome that needs to also be considered for this continent. Unlike more famous sandy hot deserts such as the Arabian or Sahara, the deserts of North America are more noted for their extent of unique flora, such as sagebrush, cacti, or Joshua trees. As a result, North American deserts aren't as barren as one might think and holds potentially attractive biodiversity. The deserts in consideration include the Sonora, Mojave, and Chihuahuan, and the Great Basin Desert, as such covers most of arid southwestern North America. The Mexican wolf is the smallest of the American grey wolves, but also the most endangered, with 143 wolves in isolated pockets of Mexico, Arizona, and New Mexico. Although not a true desert animal, the Mexican wolf prefers dry, arid scrub and open woodlands, but also has flourishing reintroduced populations in the Sonora and Chihuahua deserts. Its endangered status has seen its introduction into the first Zoo Tycoon as extra content and would be a decent choice to flagship this region. Collared peccaries are extremely commonplace in the Americas, associated with grasslands, rainforests, as well as the deserts region covered by this pack deer. In the desert, they are often called javelinas, identifiable by their light-colored band that forms their collar. For lack of a better niche candidate, and perhaps to improve the peccary and pig diversity, the collared peccary is a decent choice but can also be considered for other ideas in the Americas. The kit fox is closely related to the swift fox, except for the fact that it is an almost exclusive desert animal. They are sometimes dubbed the American fennec fox for their desert inhabitants and resemblance. Currently, kit foxes inhabit a wide distribution encompassing the Great Basin, the Californian Chaparral, Baja California, and the Sonora, Mojave, and Chihuahua deserts. An alternative could be the ring-tailed or the ring-tailed cat, which is also likewise dispersed over much of the desert regions in North America. Despite it being called the ring-tailed cat, it is in fact part of the raccoon family, found in rocky desert habitats, nesting in tree hollows close to water sources. They are quite agile and can traverse over canyon walls and rocky outcrops. Ringtails have been semi-domesticated in some instances, making affectionate pets and effective mouse catchers. As a result, they are quite common in captivity and adored as a child-friendly and pettable animal. The North American deserts also have a diverse roster of reptilia, which has been decently covered in the game so far, with the Gila monster and western diamondback rattlesnake. The chuckwalla is another potential reptile candidate, large lizards which are heavily affiliated with the American deserts. Common chuckwallas are extremely prevalent in zoo terrariums. They are adaptable, harmless to humans, primarily herbivorous and diurnal, all positive characteristics for a popular zoo showcase. For a smaller but more striking alternative, the collared lizard is a favorite among reptile keepers. Their distinct coloration makes an appealing lizard specimen, but there are even more high-profile alternatives such as the desert horned lizard or other snakes such as the Mojave green. Our final candidate goes to the desert bighorn sheep. Their adaptation to survive for extended periods without fresh water makes them capable desert animals, so much so they tend to be seen quite often in these desert regions. However, they are an endangered animal with some representation in zoos, LA Zoo, for instance, has had a successful case of captive breeding recently. The Central American rainforest is rich enough to warrant its own separate pack, irrespective of other major rainforests in the Americas, namely the Amazon. The hilly terrain of this region often forms layers of mist comparable to the Andean cloud forest. There is currently only one habitat animal from this region in the Baird's tapir, and judging by its rich biodiversity, it is quite likely to see an expansion. A diverse selection of rainforest mammalia with a particular emphasis on arboreal animals has been considered. The brown-throated, free-toed sloth has been one of the more requested animals and can equally be included as a representative of this pack or an Amazonian one. Although not a very engaging animal, their popularity and affection is quite equitable to that of the koala, and with a respectable showing in zoos, it's definitely a high-profile consideration. Our next candidate is the northern tamandua, arboreal anteaters that have also been highly requested. Although outshone by the hugely expected giant anteater in South America, the tamanduas are no less remarkable owing to their contrasting banded fur and arboreal lifestyle, and would be quite a unique addition to the roster. The alternative is the generalist white-nosed coati or coatimundi, the raccoon of Central America, consuming everything from fruits, insects to eggs and small vertebrates. It is extremely common in zoos around the world, including some especially large ones such as the Smithsonian and Leipzig Zoo. We now move on to primates, of which the Central America plays host to a breadth of diversity that can be compared to the Amazon. Spider monkeys are a notable New World monkey group. Here it is represented by the Geoffroys, or black-handed. This monkey has been chosen for their large presence in captivity. The capuchins are a viable alternative, here represented by the Panamanian white-faced, again with a strong presence in captivity. Squirrel monkeys are another New World monkey genus that should be introduced into the game as well, providing some small monkey variety to the roster, which is so far dominated by only medium and large sized primates. There are many squirrel monkey candidates from the Amazon that appear in captivity and could realistically be considered, though the Central American species is currently vulnerable. An alternative is the Geoffroy's tamarin, another animal with decent captive representation. Finally, we end this pack idea with a rodent slot. The agoutis are dominant over the Middle Americas and another animal group that should be represented in the game. The Central American agouti obviously covers the scope of the pack, but other agouti species in other regions can also be considered. An alternative is the lowland paca, another forest-dwelling rodent that is prevalent in Central and South America. Their rows of white spots are a distinguishing feature. We move to South America, but we have already covered this continent extensively in our first video with the Amazonian, Cerrado and Andean packs, so definitely check those out first. This is the Orinoco Pack, based on the Orinoco Basin that includes the marshy delta region of the Orinoco River and the Los Llanos grassy floodplains of Venezuela and Colombia. The Orinoco is obviously outshone by the Amazon River to its south, but this pack idea gives a chance to look at some overlooked, less famous, tropical South American animals. The Orinoco crocodile is the flagship. It exists solely in the Orinoco Basin and is one of the rarest reptiles in the world. Critically endangered, this crocodile suffers heavily due to its lucrative hide, and population has yet to recover. It is featured decently in captivity for these reasons. The Dallas Zoo Aquarium, for instance, holds 35 individuals as part of its prestigious Orinoco-themed exhibit. Some decent canid representation begins with the crab-eating fox. As its name suggests, this animal feeds on crabs on the floodplains, but it is an opportunistic omnivore and willingly eats a variety of food based on availability. Like the so-called other South American foxes, the crab-eating fox is not a true fox, though its size and body plan does mimic the fox, and this can be a decent addition to that niche. Otherwise, there is the bush dog. This canid is distributed over the Amazon, Cerrado and Pantanal regions, but has an abundant presence in the Orinoco as well. Unlike the previous candidate, bush dogs are exclusive carnivores, typically hunting their various rodent species in large social packs that mimic the behavior of African wild dogs. Our herbivore slot includes the South American tapir. Slightly smaller than the Baird's tapir, it is distinguishable with its unique crest and lighter tan-brown colouring. It is not as endangered as the Baird's, but still is of vulnerable status. If players feel there is too much overlap, the red brocket can be considered instead, a typical small-sized wetland grazing deer. They are perhaps not very interesting if not for the general lack of deer overall. As a South American pack, we should also have a rodent slot for the Orinoco, starting with the red-rumped agouti. This is one of the more famous and identifiable agouti species and appears extensively in zoos worldwide, owing to their ease of maintenance and playful demeanour. Alternatively, the Brazilian porcupine is one of the more unique rodent candidates from this region, but also has its respectable share of captive showcases. Finally, we end with a bird slot. The Orinoco goose is a flagship from this region. It is famous for being a largely terrestrial species, rarely taking to the skies or the water. With a tall body propped up by stocky legs, it therefore seems able to be implemented into the game without much mechanical hassle. For a more traditional wading bird, the striking scarlet ibis has immense concentrations in the Los Llanos region and is a favourite in zoos. Our final pack idea for the Americas is Patagonia. A combination of steppe-like grasslands and dry desert-like conditions is a far cry from South America's richness in the tropics, but there is enough biodiversity here to explore. For our flagship, we have the choice of either the cougar or the guanaco, arguably the two most associated animals with Patagonia, and both have been covered in our Andean pack in the first video. The cougar is present here as the apex predator, but since there are many opportunities for this animal to be represented over the entire Americas, the guanaco is a strong alternative as the major grazing and herding animal of Patagonia. The small predator slot can be represented by the namesake Patagonian fox, a relative of the Colpio which we also covered in the Andean pack idea. The alternative Geoffroy's cat appears extensively in captivity and is a resident wildcat native to this region. Both of these candidates are a toss-up and it is difficult to decide between the two. The Chilean flamingo forms immense mud nest breeding colonies all over the Patagonian steppe, and as one of the most represented flamingos in captivity, it was a frontrunner to be the flagship flamingo upon release. Obviously now it has overlap with the greater flamingo, but its differentiating creamish pink plumage and size differences could be enough to warrant it, or just for diversity's sake. If not, then the Darwin's or lesser rhea can be considered. This bird would be less prioritized than the greater rhea we covered in the Orinoco pack, but as a resident of Patagonia, this pack is a nice opportunity for it. Big hairy armadillos are the most numerous armadillo species in captivity, with a multitude of appearances at major zoos worldwide. They are also a Patagonian staple and abundant over this region, and would be considered the most likely armadillo to grace the game. The Patagonian mara can also be considered for this small mammal niche. It is also extremely abundant in captivity. Resembling a jackrabbit, they are in fact rodents, not too dissimilar from agoutis in the north. Our final slot, and a bit of a unique animal group that has not been covered, is the Magellanic penguin. It is not often that a DLC idea has space or context to accompany a penguin, but these penguins nest along the Patagonian coast and are a relevant inclusion. Furthermore, alongside their close relatives, the African and Humboldt penguins, they are one of the more well-represented penguins in zoos. The consensus is still debatable on whether or not a penguin can be added into the current game mechanics, but they have much more realistic and likelier inclusions over the more Antarctic penguins. Our special extra DLC pack idea comes in the form of cat mutations. Although the ability is already there to have albino animals in the game, such as white-furred offspring for most of the major cats, there are several mutations that have been overlooked and could be considered. Of course, the black panther is a melanistic variant of leopards and jaguars, and arguably the most notable colour morph of the big cats. Black panthers account for an approximate 11% of the total wild population, so they are quite numerous but rarely seen in the wild as they are believed to affect the individual's camouflage. As a result, melanistic leopards and jaguars usually inhabit the deepest and most inaccessible areas of the jungle. Of course, this edition banks on the future edition of either the leopard or jaguar. The golden tiger, or tabby tiger, is a colour morph usually encountered when inbreeding white and normal tigers in a captive setting. It does not appear in the wild at all, but the result of selective breeding. Due to this, they are quite a rare sighting and make for lucrative specimens in zoos. All tiger variants are believed to be capable of producing golden offspring. The Maltese tiger, on the other hand, reportedly had an unusual bluish-grey coat, though this was only recorded once in the South China tiger population in 1910. Since the Maltese blue-grey colour morph is present in domesticated cats, it may be possible Maltese tigers can exist in the wild, though this sighting is still shrouded in debate. The king cheetah is another remarkable colour morph restricted to this species, where individuals display botchier spots, a short black coloured mane, and 3 black stripes running down their backside. It is extremely rare in the wild, with only a handful of recordings, but has been selectively bred in captivity, with now 50 examples of the king cheetahs in zoos. Our last mutation is the Morozzi or spotted lion, which features no distinguishable mane and a dark fur coat infused with leopard-like spots. The Morozzi has been known to Africans for a while. European recordings of the Morozzi began in the early 20th century, and it was believed to have been a separate line subspecies adapted to montane rather than savanna habitats in the Kenyan highlands. Scientists also proposed the Morozzi could be a lion-leopard hybrid or the result of a recessive gene that has been kept in the population due to inbreeding. There are several ways Frontier could implement a pack like this into the game. My preferred method is for the price to be significantly cheaper and add these colour morphs as a skin, like in Jurassic World Evolution, where it would require extremely lucky chances or conditions to attain in offspring, or a super rare chance for it to appear in the market, or even as a rewarded individual upon completing some mission in challenge or franchise mode. Hope you guys enjoyed today's content. Like and subscribe for more Planet Zoo content and other games. Vote in the poll to select the topic of the next What's Next for Planet Zoo video series, and I'll catch you guys later.